Hello, and welcome to Soulmates, and Yi Sang's The Wings by Yi Sang, translated by Eunjung Yo and James B. Lee, read by Ivy Fox, and featuring original music by Bunny Girl Brainwave. Please enjoy. Have you ever seen a stuffed genius? I am happy. At a time like this, even love is pleasant. Only when the body sways from fatigue does the soul sparkle like a new shiny coin. As nicotine seeps into my stomach infested by roundworms, a sheet of white paper opens in my head. I put down witty and paradoxical thoughts like checker pieces on that white sheet of paper. It is an abominable disease of common sense. I again plan a life with a woman. I am a spiritual straggler who has been, so to speak, after a momentary peep at crystallized intellectualism, alienated from the strategies of love. I am planning a life granting only half to the woman, half of everything, that is. 1 foot planted in that sort of life, a half of myself chuckles at the other half, like 2 suns. I might even give up the life, bored to the bones by its ordinary events. Goodbye. Goodbye. You may indulge in the absurdity of hogging for the food you hate most. Wits and paradox. It is worth trying to counterfeit yourself. Your creation would be sublime and conspicuous among the ordinary products you have never seen. Close down the 19th century, if at all possible. The spirit of Dostoevsky can be easily wasted. Wise was he who compared Hugo to a loaf of bread for France. You must not be deceived by life or its phantom because of its details, right? Be out of harm's way, I pray you. When the bandage is cut, it bleeds. The gash will heal soon, I believe. Goodbye. Sentiment is a certain posture. I may only refer to the ingredients of that posture. If that posture develops into a stagnation, sentiment ceases to dispose of itself. In retrospect of my extraordinary maturity, I regularize my viewpoint of the world. A queen bee and a widow. Among the countless women, is there anyone who is not basically a widow? Pardon. It is an insult. My theory that the whole of every woman in real life is a widow? Goodbye. The structure of house number 33 is just like that of a house of pleasure. At this house, 18 households live side by side, their papered lattice doors identical and the cooking holes identical too. And the residents are as young as blossoms. There is no sun, for they look away from the sun. They block the sun's way into the rooms under the pretext of airing their stained bedding quilts on the wash line under the eaves. They take naps in the dusky rooms. Don't they sleep at night? I do not know. I never know because I sleep both day and night. In the daytime, house number 33 of 18 families is very quiet. It is quiet only in the daytime. At dusk, they take their bedding quilts in. With the lights on, the 18 rooms are brighter than they had been in the daytime. The sound of opening and closing the sliding doors continues to the late hours. They become busy. All sorts of smells start wafting around. The smell of roasting fish, the smell of waste water, the smell of soap. The nameplates are the most fascinating of all. There is a gate representing the 18 households, though set apart at a corner. It is always open, like a pathway. Any peddler could freely pass through this gate at any time of the day. The dwellers buy bean-curd cakes at the door of their rooms, not out at the gate. To have all the nameplates of the 18 households put together at the gate of house number 33 makes no sense at all. Somehow, it has become custom that they put their nameplates above each room door beneath the tablets showing the pompous names, such as Eternal Perseverance Pavilion and Auspicious Pavilion. We surely were fashionable enough to stick to the custom. At a corner above the door, we tacked my wife's name card as large as a train ticket. I play with nobody, nor do I ever say hello to anybody. I do not wish to exchange formalities with anybody but my wife. For me to play with or to say hello to anybody won't do any good in saving my wife's face. I regard my wife as that precious. I cherish my wife so dearly because among all the women of the 18 families at house number 33, my wife is the most beautiful and, like her name card, the most petite woman. In the shaded world under the tin roof, she radiates as the most beautiful among all the blossoms of the 18 households. I cause an ignominious, cumbersome existence for her, looking after, just hanging around the flower. My room, it is not a house, because we never had one, suited me by all means. The temperature of the room pleased me, and the duskiness of the room comforted my eyes. I did not want any other room cooler or warmer than my own, nor a room darker or more comfortable. I thanked my room all the time because it seemed to maintain itself to please me, and I was glad that I might have been born to the world for that particular room. But I did not consider happiness or unhappiness. I never needed to wonder whether I was happy or unhappy. Everything was all right as long as I was allowed to loaf day after day. That I could idle in the room fitting like a well-tailored suit to my body and soul was a convenient and comfortable situation to be in, an ideal atmosphere far apart from the worldly speculations of happiness or unhappiness. I like that environment. My room, this absolute shelter, is the 7th from the gate, lucky number 7. I loved that number like a medal of honor. But no one noticed that the sliding door dividing the room in half symbolized my destiny. The front part of the room has a little bit of the sun. The sunshine, as large as a wrapping cloth in the morning, shrinks to the size of a handkerchief later and then slips out of the room. My den is the other part of the room without sunshine, of course. I do not remember who decided that the room with the sunshine was for my wife, and the other without sunshine I do not remember who decided that the room with the sunshine was for my wife, and the other without sunshine belonged to me. I have no complaints, though. It has become a major recreation of mine that I promptly go to the front room in the morning when my wife goes out and watch various bottles on her makeup chest brilliantly glimmer with the sunbeam trickling in through the eastern window I opened. I have fun scorching tissue paper, which only my wife is entitled to use, with a small magnifying glass. The straight rays of the sun are refracted to gather at a focus, and that focus gets warmer and hotter until it starts scorching the soft paper, a feeble thread of smoke wriggling up, leaving a tiny dark hole. I am so thrilled by this short spell of anxious waiting that it almost kills me. When I am tired of this, I play in many ways with my wife's handled looking glass. A mirror is a practical thing only when it reflects one's own face. At other times, it is only a plaything. Soon I am tired of this fun too. My mischievous mind evolves from the physical level to the spiritual one. I put the looking glass down and crawl on my knees to the makeup chest to watch the cosmetic bottles in various colors. They are the most charming thing in the world. I pick one of them, open its stopper, draw the bottle to my nostrils and slowly inhale. As an exotic, sensual scent seeps into my lungs, my eyelids heavily hang down despite myself. Definitely the scent is a segment of the smell of my wife's body. I replace the stopper and begin to think, which part of her body did I smell this from? I am not sure. Why am I not sure? Because my wife's smell is the collection of all the smells from the bottles here. My wife's room was always luxuriant, while my room was so untrimmed that not even a single hook to hang the clothes on could be found on the walls. In her room, colorful skirts and vests hung in billowing bundles down from the numerous pegs nailed into the walls just beneath the ceilings. Various colorful patterns fascinated me. I think I am not so respectable, because I used to try to visualize her body and the possible shape her body might take inside those clothes. However, I had few clothes. My wife seldom gave me new ones. The only corduroy outfit I wore served as pajamas, common wear, and outing attire as well. The turtleneck was my underwear in all seasons. They were all dyed black. I suspect that the dark color had been chosen for me, so that my clothes would not look too bad if not laundered for a long time. In my shorts that had rubber bands at the waist and the thighs, I played meekly like a good boy. The sunshine that had been as large as a handkerchief had already slipped out, but my wife was not home yet. Somewhat exhausted by the trifles I had been engaging in, and knowing that I had to be back to my room before her return, I retired to my room. My room was dusky. I pulled the bedding quilt over my head to take a nap. The quilt, which had never been removed from its set location, seemed to be a welcome part of my body. Sometimes I fell asleep promptly. Sometimes I simply felt sandy all over my skin. Then I would conjure up a theme and meditate about it. Under the limp quilt, my imagination invented many things and wrote many treatises. I composed a lot of poems. But at the moment of falling asleep, every product of my imagination would dissolve into the damp air in the room like soap bubbles melting in the water. And, waking up, I would find myself a mere congestion of a nervous system, a lump like a pillow stuffed with buckwheat husks or cotton shreds. I hated bed bugs very much, but several bugs managed to survive in my room all the time, even in winter. If I had any worries, they derived from my hatred for those bugs. I scratched the itching parts bitten by the bugs until my skin bled. It was sore. It certainly was an act of profound pleasure. I fell asleep luxuriously. In my contemplating sessions under that damp quilt, I never engaged in positive thinking. For me, that was not necessary at all. If I discovered something positive, Eventually, I had to discuss it with my wife, and she would scold me, and that was bothersome, although I am not afraid of her scolding. I would rather be lazy like a loafing beast than to be a respectable individual social being and be scolded by her. If it were possible, I would cast off this meaningless mask of humanity. For me, human society was autonomous. Life was self-providing. Everything was strange to me. My wife washes her face twice a day. I wash myself not even once a day. I usually go to relieve myself at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. If the moon is bright, I will linger outside absent-mindedly for some time before returning to my room, so I rarely come across anyone of the 18 households. Still, I recognize most of the women in the 18 families. None of them is a peer to my wife in beauty. My wife's first session of face washing at 11 in the morning is rather simple. Her second session around 7 in the evening takes much time and care. She dresses herself better and cleaner at night. She goes out at daytime, and she goes out at night too. Did she have a job? I could not tell what her occupation was. If she did not have a job, she did not have to go out, as I did not have to, but she did. She not only went out, but entertained many guests at home. When she had many guests, I had to stay under the bedding quilt in my room all the time she was with them. I could not play with the magnifying glass. I could not sniff at the cosmetics. On those occasions, I pretended to be sorrowful. Then she would tip me a coin, a 50 John silver coin. I liked it. Since I did not know what to do with those coins, I used to throw them to the head of my bed until the silver coins formed a small pile. My wife saw the collection of coins one day and bought me a coffer-shaped savings box. After I put all my coins in the box one by one, she locked the box and took the key away. I remember I kept dropping a coin now and then into the box even after that, and I kept being lazy. When I found a trinket dangling like a pimple on her forehead, I understood why the saving box was lighter than before. I stopped paying attention to the box. I was too lazy to alert myself against such incidents. When my wife was attending guests at night, however more deeply I might burrow into the bed, I could not fall asleep on rainy nights. At such times I meditated on as to why my wife always had money, much money. The visitors seemed not to be aware of my presence at this side of the partition of the sliding door. They would frequently utter such reckless jokes to my wife that I myself would not dare to share with her. However, some of her guests were well-mannered. They usually left a little later than midnight. Some others were rather uncultured. And those personalities would order foods from nearby restaurants and would enjoy themselves all night. At first, I started research to identify my wife's occupation, but I failed to verify her vocation due to my limited knowledge and short-sighted observations on life. I may never be able to discover what her profession is. My wife wore brand new white cotton socks all the time. She cooked rice, too. As a matter of fact, I have never seen her cook, but she never failed to fetch me something to eat at mealtime. At our home, there is nobody but my wife and I, so she must have cooked the rice. Yet, my wife never invited me to her room. I always ate and slept alone in the hidden room. The rice was tasteless. The side dishes were miserable. Although I kept taking the fodder like a puppy or a chicken without complaints, I regretted the dreadful food now and then. Naturally, I was emaciated. my complexion growing paler and paler. I noticed my health failing me every day. The bones stood out here and there as tokens of undernourishment. I could not stand the pain at the joints of my bones in bed, so I tossed to this side and that tens of times a night. During my research about the origin of her money, I investigated what kind of food was being served at the other side of the sliding door, from the smell drifting in through the door's chinks. I had a troubled sleep. I found out. I realized that the money she spent was given by the strange visitors, whom I considered very silly. However, I could not understand the ethics of the guests leaving money and my wife taking it. Could it be out of sheer courtesy? Or was it a sort of price, a reward for something? Did my wife look to them to be a pitiful woman in need of alms? As I tried to untangle such riddles, my intellect would whirl in chaos. The final conclusion I reached before falling asleep was that I did not like the whole business, but I did not ask her any questions about it. That questioning might have been troublesome, and anyway, I would forget it all by the time I woke up. After the guests left, or when she returned home from her outing, she would change to common clothes and then drop in at my room. Lifting the quilt, she would whisper several untrue words into my ears to console me. With a smile that is neither a sneer nor a cheer, I looked up at her radiant face. She smiled, but I did not miss a ghost of sadness hovering about her countenance. She would certainly notice that I was hungry, yet she never offered me the leftover foods in the other room. That was out of her respect towards me, I thought. Although I was hungry, it satisfied me. I did not care what she whispered into my ears before returning to her room. The silver coin she left at the head of my bed glittered in the electric light. How many of those coins could have gathered in the savings box? I did not lift the box to measure the weight, though. I merely dropped new coins into the narrow slot that looked like a buttonhole. The reason why my wife had to leave me silver coins was as much a mystery to me as the reason why the visitors offered her money. Though I did not disapprove her of tipping me the coins, it offered me no more pleasure than the short happiness lasting from the moment my fingers touched the coin until it disappeared into the miniature coffer's slot. One day I threw the savings box into the toilet. I did not know exactly how many coins were in it, but the box was quite heavy. I felt despondent when I recognized my existence on an earth that was dashing with lightning speed across the limitless space. I wanted to get off the earth promptly, lest I should feel giddy on that busy globe. After I meditated in my bed about such things, even such acts as dropping the coins into the box seemed to be annoying too. I hoped my wife would manage the saving business herself. I hopefully waited for her to take the box to her room, if she had a mind to at all, because my wife alone needed money, which never meant anything to me in the first place. But she did not take it with her. I almost decided to take it to her room myself, but there were so many guests for her those days that I found no opportunity to deliver it to her room. So, I had to take it to the toilet. I sadly waited for her reproach, but she did not ask or say anything to me about it. That was not all. She kept giving me the coins. Soon there was a new small heap of coins by my pillow. Lying in bed, I started new research leading to the conclusion that there was no reason but simple pleasure that might have prompted my wife to tip me and the visitors to offer her money. I continued my research to determine what kind of pleasure it was, if pleasure had been the motivation for such charities. However, I could not discover it all from my research in bed alone. Pleasure, pleasure, I found myself unexpectedly engrossed in that joy. My wife, in a way, confined me all the time. I, of course, had no complaints, yet I wanted to learn from experience if that pleasure existed or not. I sneaked out of my room while my wife was out. Outside on the street, I did not forget to change my coins for bills. They amounted to 5 won. With that money in my pocket, I loitered around as I pleased so that I might get lost. The wonderful outside world, which I had not seen for a long time, did not fail to arouse my nerves. I was tired out immediately, but I endured. Until dark, I sauntered aimlessly here and there, not knowing why I was doing this. I did not spend a penny, of course. I did not dare to spend any. It seemed I had a long time ago completely lost the faculty of spending money. I could not stand fatigue any longer. I somehow got back to my house. Since I had to pass through my wife's room to reach mine, I hesitantly hemmed before the sliding door to notify her of my presence, in case she was with any visitors. Suddenly, the door whacked open, and her face, along with a stranger's face behind it, peeked out at me. I faltered a little, dazed by the blinding light flooding out of the room. I saw her spiteful stare, but I simply had to pretend that I had seen nothing. Why? Because I had to pass through her room, and I pulled the quilt over my head. My legs ached unbearably. In bed, I was going to faint any moment, and my heart pounded heavily. I had been unaware of it while walking, but I was out of breath. Cold sweat stood out on my back. I regretted that I had gone out. I wanted a long, sound sleep, forgetting all this fatigue. I wanted a good, long sleep. As I lay on my side for some time, my thumping heart eased down. I felt much better. I tossed myself to lie down flat, to look up at the ceiling, and stretched my legs. My heart was destined to keep on thudding for some time. Through the slit in the sliding door, I overheard the hushed whisper shared by my wife and her man guest at the other side of the partition. I opened my eyes wide to further concentrate my auditory senses. I held my breath. Then I heard them rise. The man put on his coat and hat. The sliding door opened, and his heels slipped into his shoes. He thudded down to the yard, and her rubber shoes dragged down the stepping stones. The sound of their unhurried feet went afar towards the gate. I had never known of such behavior on the part of my wife. To the best of my knowledge, she had not whispered to any of her guests in such a manner before. I never missed any words spoken by my wife in that particular voice, which was neither too loud nor too quiet, although I sometimes ignored the warbles of the drunk, tongue-twisted guests. Some of the unsavory remarks made by her visitors got on my nerves, but I used to forgive them because they were relatively behaving themselves. I disapproved of that sudden change in her attitude towards her guests, probably because of some certain unavoidable reasons, I wondered, but I resolved not to engage myself any more in such kind of research, because I was tired that night. So I tried to sleep. I could not fall asleep at first, nor did she return from the gate quickly. Somehow, in the meantime, I fell asleep despite myself. My dream drifted along strange, labyrinthine streets. I was shaken violently. My wife was shaking me after she had seen her guest off. I opened my eyes wide to look up at her. No smile could I see in her face. I scrubbed my eyes and studied her expression more closely. Anger was in her eyes, her thin lips trembling. It was an anger that would not thaw away easily. I closed my eyes, waiting for her to explode, but she gasped a while, and then I heard her long skirt swish away as she went back to her room. I tossed myself to squat like a frog, wrapping my back with the bedding quilt, and again I regretted that I had gone out. From bed, I apologized to my wife, that it was of her own misunderstanding. I believed that it was late enough for my homecoming. Really, I did not know that it was earlier than midnight. I was too tired. I was foolish that I had walked too much. If it really was my fault, that was it. What had I gone out for anyway? I wanted to give the money, 5 won, that had collected by my pillow, to somebody, to anybody at all. That was all. If it was still my fault, perhaps it was so. Was I not sorry about that? If I had known how to spend that 5 won, I certainly did not need to return home before midnight, but the streets were too crowded, and there were too many of them. I could not point out a single person out of the crowd, the one to whom I was supposed to give that money away. Eventually, I tired myself out. Above all, I needed a rest. I wanted to lie down. I could not but come back home. I believed it was late enough, but it was unfortunate that it was before midnight. I was sorry. I could apologize as much as she wanted. But what was all this apology for, anyway, as long as she did not understand how it had happened? It was annoying. For an hour, I fidgeted like that. I pushed the quilt away, squirmed up, opened the sliding door, and shuffled into her room. My head was swimming in half-consciousness. I only faintly remember that, falling over her bedding quilt, I fished out the money from my pocket and crushed it into her hand. When I woke up the next morning, I was in her bed, in her room. This was the first time that I had ever slept in her room since we moved to house number 33. The sun was up high, but she was not with me. She had gone out early in the morning. Well, she might have gone out last night immediately after I had fallen unconscious, but I did not feel like investigating it. My whole body was so sore that I found difficulty even in wriggling my fingers. The sun in the window, a little bit smaller than a wrapping cloth, dazzled my sight. In the column of the sun rays, numerous particles of dust danced like microbes. My nostrils were stuffy. I pulled the quilt over my head and began working on a nap. But the scent of my wife's body coming from the bedding cloth stirred my nostrils, irritating me. I could not fall asleep easily as I, tossing myself time and again, floated amid clouds of various scents popping out in my memory, the perfumes smoking out of the colorful bottles on the makeup chest. As I could not stand it any longer, I kicked off the quilt and came back to my room. An assembly of bowls containing my cold breakfast was waiting there. Before going out, my wife had prepared that fodder for me. I was hungry at that moment. The first spoonful of rice felt against my tongue as cold as an iced fish slice. I put down the spoon and wormed into the bedding quilt. The bedding, that had not been occupied the previous night, welcomed me as usual. With the quilt over me, I slept heartily, very soundly. The electric light was on when I woke up, but my wife was not in yet. Maybe she had returned and gone out again? Why should I worry? I felt better. I recalled what had happened the previous night. I simply could not describe the joy I had felt when I, collapsing, thrust the money into her hand. I was enthralled that I understood, to some extent, the psychology of the visitors leaving money to my wife or my wife tipping me the coins. I simpered. I, who had lived in ignorance of that delight, had been so naive, it seemed. I felt like dancing around. So I wanted to go out again that night. But I had no money. I resented that I had given her all of the 5 won last night, and I regretted that I dumped the saving box into the latrine. I was quite disappointed and listlessly thrust my hands into my pants pocket, where the money had been hidden once, and fished around. To my great surprise, I felt something. It was money, though only 2 won. It did not need to be much money. What was there was sufficient for me, and I was very grateful for what I got. I found my strength. I strutted out to the street triumphantly, attired in my only corduroy suit, unaware of hunger and my unmentionable appearance. Going out, I restlessly prayed for time to flee like a shot arrow, so that it would be past midnight in no time. Though I liked that I had given her money and slept in her room, I was afraid to confront her accusing stare in the unfortunate case that I should return home before midnight, while she was with her companion. I roamed around until dark, glancing again and again at the street clocks. Strangely, I was not so easily tired out that evening. The only thing that bothered me was the slowness of time. After I made sure by the big clock at the Guinhoe station that it was after midnight, I headed for home. I found my wife talking to her guest at the gate. I passed by them, ignoring their presence, and went into my room. A while later, she came in. She began to sweep the room in the middle of the night, something she had not done in her whole life. Afterwards, as soon as I heard her lie down to sleep, I opened the sliding door, plunged into her room, and gave her 2 won. She cast a questioning glance at me, as if she wondered why I had not spent the money that night either, and she let me sleep in her room without any questions. I did not want to give this joy away for anything in the world. I slept soundly. The next morning, when I woke up, she was not at home. Lethargic, I crept back to my room and took a nap. When she shook me to wake me up, the light was on, as usual. She invited me to her room. This, too, was unprecedented. She pulled my arm, all the while a smile rippling in her face. I was quite restless, suspecting that there might be a secret plot hidden behind such a strange attitude. At her request, I dragged myself to her room. Supper was prepared there. I remembered that I had not eaten anything for 2 days. I vaguely wondered if I was hungry at all. I reasoned that even if a thunder of wrath followed this last supper, I would not be resentful. In fact, I had been too annoyed by the boring human world. Everything bothered and troubled me, but an unexpected catastrophe would have excited me. Peacefully, I shared that quiet, odd supper with my wife. We didn't talk to each other. So, after supper, I simply slouched up and shuffled back to my room. She did not hold me back. Sitting against the wall with a cigarette in my mouth, I waited for the thunder to strike soon, if it would strike at all. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. But there was no thunder. Tension gradually eased down. I was already thinking about going out again that night, wishing I had some money. I had no money with me. There would be no joy I could expect afterwards, even if I would go out. I was crestfallen. Angrily, I rolled in the bed. The rice I had just eaten seemed to push up back to my throat. I felt nausea. I was sad and angry that bank bills did not pour down from the sky like a shower. I did not know any other way to get money. I think I cried a little in bed, sad that I had no money. Then my wife came to my room again. Holding my breath, I squatted like a toad and waited for the violent reproach that I anticipated to fall on me. On the contrary, The voice emitting out of my wife's lips was a tender one. She spoke with affection. She said she understood why I cried. She said it was because I had no money. I was surprised. I was worried by her ability for such a thorough understanding of my mind, yet I was happy because I noticed from the way she spoke to me that she would give me some money. As I waited for her next move, wrapping myself with the quilt, here, she dropped something near my pillow, something that sounded like a bill. Then she whispered into my ear that it would be perfectly all right if I returned home that night later than usual. That was by no means difficult. Above all, I was grateful for the money. Anyway, I went out. I had an early case of nyctalopia, so I chose to wander along the streets illuminated brightly. I went to the Gyeongsung station and stopped by a tea room near the waiting hall for the express passengers. That tea room was a great discovery of mine. First of all, nobody I knew came there. Even if there was one, he would not stay too long there. I decided that I would come to that tea room every day to pass the time. What I liked about the place was that the clocks there kept more accurate time than any other clocks anywhere, so I did not have to face any misfortune of returning home too early, mistaken by a stupid clock. I sat with nothingness in a booth and sipped a cup of hot coffee. Amid their busy hours, the passengers seemed to enjoy a cup of coffee with relish. They would gaze at a wall as if in deep thought, sipping the coffee in a hurry, and then would leave. It was sad. But I truly loved that sadness about the place, something I cherished more than the depressing atmosphere of other street-side tea rooms. The occasional shrill screaming of the train hoots sounded more familiar and intimate to me than Mozart. I read up and down the short list on the menu several times. The names of foods looked as remote to me as the names of my early childhood friends. As I was drifting in swimming thoughts, lost in time, customers disappeared one after another, and the waiters began to clean the tables and the corners of the room. So it must be the time to close. A little past 11, the tea room ceased to be a shelter for me. I shambled out, worrying where I should go to pass the time, loitering until and after midnight. It was raining. The raindrops were big enough to harass me, for I did not have an umbrella or a raincoat. In such quaint attire of mine, I could no longer loaf in the hall of the station, so I left the place, ready to risk the rain. It was so cool outside that I could not stand much of it. My corduroy suit was soaked, my underwear damp and cold against my skin. I tried to wander in the rain until the last moment I could endure, waiting for midnight to come and go, but I could not stand it too long. I got chilly with fever, my teeth chattering. Hurrying my pace, I thought, well, she certainly wouldn't have any guests on such a night of hard rain. I decided to believe she had no visitors. I had to go home. If she unfortunately had guests, I would beg for her understanding of my situation. She could see it was raining so hard, and she would forgive me for anything. When I hurried back home, she was not alone. I was cold and damp. I happened to forget to knock, and I happened to see what my wife would have preferred me not to. Leaving huge wet footprints across my wife's room, I came into my den, took my wet clothes off, and covered myself with the bedding quilt. I shivered all over. The fever was growing severe. I felt the earth was crumbling down underneath me. Finally, I fell unconscious. The next morning when I opened my eyes, my wife was sitting by me with a worried look. I had caught cold. I felt cold, my limbs lethargic, and I had a splitting headache. She felt my head and said I had to take medicine. As I thought I would have to take an anti-febrile because I had such a fierce fever as to feel her hands cold against my forehead, she gave me a cup of warm water and 4 tablets. She told me that I would be all right if I took the tablets and had a sound sleep. I gulped them down. A little arid, they tasted like aspirins. I pulled the quilt over me again and fell asleep as if dying instantly. I ailed for several days, sniffing. I continually took the tablets while I was sick. I recovered from the cold, but my appetite did not return. Everything tasted as bitter as sumac bark. I regained the urge to go out, but my wife forbade me. She told me to take the medicine every day and stay in bed. She said I had gone out for no good reason at all but to fall sick and bother her. She was right. So I decided I would look after my health, taking the medicine every day and not going out again. I slept day and night, covering myself with the quilt. Day and night, deadly sleep hung heavily over me, and I firmly believed it was evidence of my recovery that I wanted that much sleep. It seemed a month had passed that way. My hair and beard had grown so long that I felt scruffy, so I sneaked into my wife's room while my wife was out and sat before the makeup chest to see how I looked. It was quite a sight. My hair and beard bristled out in all directions. I made up my mind to have my hair cut today, and I took the bottles, removed the stoppers, and sniffed the perfume one by one. The scent I had forgotten for so long stung my nostrils. I called my wife's name in my heart, Yonsim. I played with the magnifying glass, too. I played with the mirror. The sun rays trickling through the window were so warm. Well, it was May already. I stretched myself and lied down in my wife's bed, and I wanted to brag to God that my life was so comfortable and pleasant. I maintained no relationships with anything in the world. Not even God, perhaps, could praise or punish me. Then I noticed a very strange thing. It was a bottle of soporific adaline. I found it under her makeup chest, and I thought it looked like aspirin. I opened it. Exactly 4 tablets were missing. I remembered I had taken 4 pills that morning. I slept. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, and the day before that, I had been heavily drowsy. I had recovered from the cold, but she kept giving me the drugs. Once, a neighbor's house was on fire while I was deeply asleep. I did not know it because I was asleep. I slept like that. Then I must have taken Adelines, believing they were aspirins, for a month. That was too much. All of a sudden, I felt giddy, and I almost fainted. I left home with the bottle of drugs in my pocket, and I climbed up a hill. I did not want to see anything of the human world. Plodding, I tried not to think anything about my wife. I did not want to faint on the road. I was going to do some research about my wife after I found and settled down at a sunny place. I thought about the multiplication and breeding of the roadside forsythia, the skylarks, and the stones. Fortunately, I did not faint on the road. There was a bench. I sat on it stiffly and began my investigation on aspirins and adelines. But my mind was in such confusion that I could not lead an organized scientific reasoning. I turned gruff and annoyed because stray thoughts would not let my investigation continue for even 5 consecutive minutes. I took out the 6 adelines I had brought with me from my pocket and chewed on them. They tasted funny. Then I lay down full length on the bench. Why had I done it? I could not give the reason. I simply wanted to. I fell deeply asleep there. In my sleep, I faintly heard the distant chatter of a stream running among rocks. When I woke up, the day was already bright. I had slept there one full day and night. The landscape looked pure yellow. A flock of thoughts about Aspirin and Adeline flew through my head. Aspirin, Adeline, Aspirin, Marx, Malthus, Matros, Aspirin, Adeline. My wife had given me Adelines for a month, telling me they were aspirins. The evidence was only obvious because I found the bottle in her room. For what purpose did she have to make me sleep day and night? What did she do all the while I was asleep after she had given me the drug? Did she want me to die gradually? What I had taken might have really been aspirins after all. Maybe she was the one who had to take Adelines herself to help her fall asleep and overcome a certain agony she had. If so, I was sorry. I was sorry that I had suspected her so much. I hurried my way down the hill. I walked towards home, my legs reeling beyond control. It was almost 8 o'clock. I was going to confess and apologize to her for all my evil thoughts. I was in such a hurry that I forgot to prepare what I was going to say. Then a really terrible thing happened. I happened to see what I should not. In a flurry, I shut the sliding door of my wife's room and I clung to the doorpost, hanging my head to get over the dizziness. The next instant, the door opened, and my wife, her clothes ruffled, rushed out of the room to clutch my neck. I tumbled down, my head in turmoil. Then she landed on top of me and bit me at random. It hurt. Since I had no strength or intention to resist, I sprawled down meekly and let her do whatever she wanted to do about me. Soon, her guest came out of the room, lifted her and went back to the room, carrying her in his arms. I hated her being so submissively carried away into the room by a stranger. I hated her. On her way back to her own room, my wife raved viciously that I had been loafing around night after night making love to women or stealing things. That really was too much. I could not protest about anything, dumbfounded. I almost started to scream at her that she had been planning to kill me, but I restrained myself, for I did not want to face any consequence by saying anything I was not so sure of. Believing silence was the best policy at the moment, I shambled up to my feet, quietly pulled out the money from my pocket, and not knowing exactly why I did so, I put it before the sliding door and ran away. Several times I was almost run over by a car before I managed to reach the Gyeongsung station. I wanted to sit in an empty booth and somehow get rid of the sour taste in my mouth. Coffee. Fine. But at the moment I stepped into the station building, I suddenly recalled there was not even a single penny in my pocket. I felt dizzy. I was at a loss, faltering before the building, roaming here and there like a haunted person. I do not remember where I had been. Several hours later, I found myself on the roof of Mitsukoshi department store. It was about noon. I flopped down anywhere at random and started recollecting the 26 years of my life. No particular subject popped out of my lax memory. Then I asked myself, what desire do you have for life? But I did not want to answer whether I had any desire at all. For me, even the significance of my own existence was difficult to decipher. Stooping, I watched goldfish in a nearby bowl. They looked nice. The bigger ones, as well as the smaller ones, looked lively. In the showering May sun rays, the fish dropped their shadows at the bottom of the glass bowl. The fins waved like handkerchiefs. Trying to count the number of fins, I kept stooping down. My back was warm against the sun. I looked down at the littered streets below. Down there, the tired life swayed heavily like the fins of a goldfish. They could not free themselves from the glue, the invisible tangle of threads shackling them. I realized that I could not but mingle into that littered street, dragging my body suffering from fatigue and hunger. Suddenly, I stopped to think. Where was I now going? My wife's face popped out before my eyes. Aspirins and Adelines. We misunderstood each other. How could she have given me Adelines instead of aspirins? I would not believe it. She could not have done so, as I did not go around stealing or making love to women every night. It was not so, really. We were like a lame couple, destined not to harmonize with each other's gait. I did not need to summon any logic to justify her behavior or mine. There was no need for any defense. We would stumble on and on, truth and misunderstanding on their own separate ways. Was that not the usual way? But I was not so sure if it was right for me to trudge back to my wife. Should I? Or else, where should I go? A siren wailed, announcing noon. It was a glorious noon, people vigorously whirling around amid the commotion of glass, steel, marble, money, and ink. My armpits suddenly itched. Ah, it was where my imitation wings had split out. The wings that I had no longer. The deleted phantasms of hope and ambition flashed in my mind like the flipping pages of a pocket dictionary. I stopped my pace and wanted to shout, "Wings, spread out again! Fly, fly, fly! Let me fly once more! Let me fly just once more!"